He built a spaceship in his backyard. He told his friends he was in contact with beings from beyond the stars. He studied engineering blueprints without ever going to school, and he believed he had been chosen for something greater. Then one night, he left a note. A note that said he was going on a trip through the galaxy. His truck was found later in the woods, but Granger Taylor was never seen again. Stories like this don't come around often, so make sure you're subscribed, because this is the Midnight Channel, where the strange never sleeps. Granger Taylor was born in 1948 in the quiet town of Duncan, British Columbia. From the beginning, he was different. Quiet, observant, and deeply curious about how things worked. While other children were playing sports or chasing distractions, Granger was dismantling radios, not to destroy them, but to learn. By the time he was a teenager, he could rebuild anything with moving parts. At 14, he dropped out of school. Not because he couldn't keep up, but because he felt he'd already learned what he needed. Without a diploma, without a teacher, and without formal training, Granger rebuilt an abandoned bulldozer engine by himself. Then a derelict car, then a World War II fighter plane, all of it done in his backyard, using scrap parts and intuition. Locals started calling him a mechanical genius. People brought him engines, radios, and machines that hadn't worked in years. He fixed them all. And yet, despite his growing reputation, he never sought fame or recognition. He was never boastful, never proud, just curious. It was that curiosity that began to drift upward toward the stars. He started reading about space travel, propulsion systems, alien technology. He studied schematics for rockets and engines that were far beyond anything a small-town mechanic should have access to. And then one day he began building something strange behind his home, a large silver structure shaped like a saucer. He told people it was a spaceship, not a model, not a piece of art. A real spaceship. The neighbors watched in disbelief as he worked day and night, bolting metal sheets, welding supports, installing salvaged electronics. He used satellite dishes, old radio parts, airplane scraps, and homemade designs. When asked why he was building it, his answer was always the same. Because I'm going to space. People laughed nervously, but Granger didn't smile. He said he had been receiving messages, telepathic communications from beings not of this earth. He believed they were preparing him for a journey, that they had chosen him. At first, most thought it was just Granger being eccentric. He wasn't dangerous or erratic, just quiet, focused, and often lost in thought. He would disappear for hours into the woods near his home and return with strange stories about lights in the sky, about voices that came to him without sound. He never claimed to see aliens in physical form, only to hear them, to understand them without speaking. His family worried quietly, but Granger was so functional, so logical in every other aspect of his life that they chalked it up to imagination. He wasn't a drinker. He didn't use drugs. He was meticulous in his work and sharp in his conversations, and he never showed signs of mental illness, just a deep, deep belief that he was meant for something beyond Earth. As the spaceship in his backyard neared completion, Granger began talking about a specific date. He wouldn't say what would happen, only that he was preparing. The structure he'd built wasn't capable of flight. Not really. It had no engine, no fuel system, no navigation. But that didn't seem to matter to him. He said the ship was symbolic, that the real transportation would come from somewhere else, that the beings he had spoken to would provide the way. Friends said he started speaking in strange metaphors about dimensions, about time not working the way we think it does, and about leaving behind this reality like stepping out of a dream. But through it all, Granger remained grounded in other ways. He helped people in town fix machines for free and spoke with anyone who asked about his spaceship. He never tried to convince people he was right. He just believed it himself. And when the day finally came, the day he had been quietly preparing for, he left a note. A simple handwritten message on 2 pieces of paper, saying he was going to board an alien ship for a 42-month journey through the galaxy and that he would return. Then he got into his truck and drove off into the night. He was never seen again. The night Granger Taylor disappeared was cold and wet. It was November 29th, 1980. Rain was falling across Vancouver Island, and most people in Duncan were indoors. Granger left no indication of where he was headed, just the note it read. Dear Mother and Father, I have gone away to walk aboard an alien spaceship as reoccurring dreams assured a 42-month interstellar voyage to explore the vast universe. Then return. I am leaving behind all my possessions to you, as I will no longer require the use of any. Love, Granger. He had signed it calmly, as if this was a business trip. The note was left on his bed along with a map of Waterloo Mountain, a remote forested area outside town. Granger's family contacted the police immediately. Search teams were dispatched, helicopters flown overhead, tracking dogs brought in. Nothing. There were no tire tracks, no recent footprints, no signs of campfires or shelters. His truck was gone, and so was he. For weeks his parents clung to hope that he would simply come home, that this was all some kind of symbolic act. But the days passed. The weather turned colder, and there were no leads. Eventually, the police treated it as a missing person case. But without foul play or a known destination, there was little they could do. Granger's disappearance spread across the island. News stations picked it up, and word got out that the young man who built a spaceship was now missing. Some locals said they weren't surprised. They'd always thought Granger was strange. Others said they had seen something that night. One man claimed to have seen strange lights moving silently above the tree line out near Mount Prevost. Another said his radio picked up high-pitched signals he'd never heard before around the same time, but none of it could be verified. And the longer Granger was gone, the more the theories grew that he had taken his own life, that he had staged his disappearance, that something had happened to him in the woods, or that maybe, just maybe, he really had made contact. The note became a fixation for investigators and believers alike. It was written in Granger's careful handwriting, not erratic or delusional. It referenced a 42-month journey, which to some seemed oddly specific. Why 42 months? Why not say 3 years? Was it meant to imply something cosmic? Some believed it referred to a biblical time period. Others said it matched patterns in UFO lore, that certain abduction cases referenced missing time in multiples of 42. The location of Waterloo Mountain also drew attention. It was vast, rugged, and difficult to search thoroughly. Some parts were accessible only by foot or ATV, and even then, only during certain seasons. Over the next few months, search parties combed the area again and again, but the forest gave up nothing. No remains, no crash site, no personal belongings. It was as if Granger had stepped off the edge of the world. Years passed, and interest in the case faded. His spaceship still sat in his backyard, gathering rust, a monument to obsession, or to belief. His family never moved it. They treated it like a gravesite, even though there was no body. Then, in 1986, nearly 6 years later, something changed. A logger working deep in the forest near Mount Prevost found a pile of debris, It looked like the remains of a truck. An explosion had torn it apart. Parts were embedded in the trees and scattered across the forest floor. Investigators were brought in, and they confirmed it was Granger's Datsun pickup. Inside the blast zone, they found small bone fragments, enough to suggest a person had been in the vehicle, but not enough to make a formal identification. DNA analysis at the time was limited and inconclusive. There were no fillings, no dental matches, just fragments. The coroner suggested it was consistent with an explosion, possibly involving dynamite, which Granger may have had access to from his mechanical work. But there were no obvious materials left behind, no fuse, no clear ignition point. And the spread pattern of the debris was strange, almost as if the truck had detonated in the air or had been struck by something from above. The RCMP eventually closed the case. They listed Granger Taylor as presumed deceased due to a self-inflicted explosion, but his family never accepted that, not fully. They said it wasn't like him, that he had made plans to return, that he had been calm, not depressed, and that the note he left didn't read like a suicide letter. It read like a promise. Even after the RCMP closed the case, the search for Granger Taylor never truly ended. Not for his family, not for his friends, and not for the growing number of people who believed something more had happened. His parents kept his belongings untouched. His spaceship sat rusting in the backyard, a silent reminder that someone had once tried to build a way off this world. Some came to see it as a monument. Others called it a shrine. Tourists began visiting the site, snapping photos of the saucer and leaving messages. Some even claimed to feel strange sensations near it, as if it still held some kind of charge. Granger's old schoolmates remembered him not as a recluse, but as someone driven by something they couldn't quite understand. He had been friendly, helpful, quiet, but never lost, and yet he had vanished without a trace. In the years following his disappearance, the UFO community began to pick up on the story. It spread through fanzines and local Canadian radio shows, then made its way into international publications. By the early 1990s, Granger Taylor had become a kind of folk legend, the man who built a spaceship and left Earth. Documentaries hinted at the case, but rarely covered it in depth, partly because there were so few facts, and partly because the idea of someone leaving with extraterrestrials was still considered fringe. But not everyone dismissed the possibility. Some researchers pointed to the note he left behind. Its wording had no sign of emotional distress. He spoke of a journey, a return, and he left all his possessions behind in a way that felt organized, not chaotic. Others focused on the detail of 42 months. Had something happened on a cosmic clock? Had he meant to return and something stopped him? Or had he returned and simply never revealed himself? Psychologists weighed in, saying it could have been a delusion, that Granger may have suffered from a slow-forming psychosis masked by his intelligence. But those who knew him said otherwise. He had been too clear-headed, too focused. They said, if this was a delusion, it was the most orderly one anyone had ever seen. The remains of his truck were examined again in later years with modern forensic tools. Still no conclusive evidence, no DNA match, no blast residue that could confirm dynamite or explosives, just twisted metal and fragments of bone too small to identify. One former investigator said off record that the blast pattern made no sense. He said the truck looked like it had been crushed, not blown apart, pressed in from above. But he couldn't explain how. Others claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky above Mount Prevost, even after the explosion. Even years later, a few hikers went missing in that area under unclear circumstances. though nothing was directly tied to Granger. Some believe the forest holds more secrets than anyone wants to admit. Then there were the letters. A few years after the disappearance, a local paper received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Granger's name typed at the top, and below it a string of coordinates. They led to an uninhabited island off the coast of Vancouver Island, a rocky place with no buildings and no signs of habitation. Searchers found nothing there, but it reignited interest in the case. Was it a hoax, a prank, or a message from someone trying to point towards something hidden? Another letter appeared a few years later, this one handwritten in block letters. It said simply, "He left because he was asked to. He'll come back when it's safe." Nothing else. No name, no date, no origin. The RCMP dismissed both as hoaxes, but Granger's parents never stopped hoping. His mother would still look out the window some nights, expecting his truck to pull up the driveway. She left the porch light on for years. Eventually, the visits from reporters slowed. The theories faded from public view, but in Duncan, people still remembered. And in the woods around Mount Prevost, some still say strange things happen. Flickers of light in the trees, faint hums late at night, things that don't belong in the wilderness. Granger Taylor had said he was leaving Earth, and some believe he did. There are many theories about what happened to Granger Taylor. Some are tragic, some are fantastical, and some live in the space between. The most conventional explanation is that Granger took his own life, that the note was a poetic way of saying goodbye, and that the explosion in the woods was intentional. Some who believe this point to the remains of the truck, the isolated location, and his fascination with leaving Earth. They say he wanted to disappear completely, and did, but that theory has cracks. Granger showed no signs of depression in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He was making plans, building things, helping neighbors. He was future-focused. And he didn't leave a note of despair. He left a note of intent. Another theory is that the explosion wasn't intentional at all, that it was an accident, that he brought explosives into the woods for some unknown experiment and something went wrong. Maybe he was trying to simulate some kind of launch or signal. Maybe he was hoping to create an event that would attract attention from the sky. But again, there was no clear evidence of that. No wiring, no detonator, no clear motive. Then there's the theory that he was murdered, that someone followed him into the woods, took advantage of his eccentricity, and left the scene staged. But who would do that? And why? Granger wasn't wealthy. He wasn't involved in anything criminal. He was kind and well-liked. It would be a random act, and random acts usually leave more behind. The most enduring theory is the one he left behind himself, that he was contacted by something not of this earth, and that he left willingly. Some say the note wasn't symbolic but literal, that the 42-month timeline was based on something real, that he was given a window of contact, a promise and an invitation, and that he went to meet them. The explosion, some say, was a cover, a way to leave a false trail, or to mask something unexplainable. Others think the explosion was caused by something external, a malfunction in a retrieval attempt, or a side effect of technology we don't understand. There are UFO researchers who claim that the area around Mount Prevost has long been a hotspot for sightings, that electromagnetic anomalies have been measured there, and that some locals have reported high-pitched frequencies in the woods without any source. A few even believe the explosion was the result of an energy event tied to some kind of dimensional shift, that Granger wasn't taken in a ship but passed through something, a gate, a rift, an opening between realities. Those theories are harder to accept, But for some, they explain why there was no body, no trace, no clear cause. Granger's writings in the months before he disappeared also feed these theories. He kept journals full of calculations, diagrams and notes on propulsion systems that seemed beyond what he had studied. Some of his sketches resembled concepts found later in declassified patents for advanced aircraft, including designs eerily similar to what we now call the Tic-Tac UFOs. And he drew them years before they entered the public record. Was it coincidence? Was he just ahead of his time, or was he shown something? Then there's the matter of his dreams. Granger told people he was having vivid recurring dreams of being taken aboard a ship, of being shown stars he couldn't name, of hearing voices that told him he had a purpose, that he was being prepared. He believed those dreams were real, that they weren't dreams at all, but communications. Many who experience what they call contact report similar patterns, a sense of mission, a connection that overrides fear, and an unshakable feeling that they are not alone. Skeptics argue that this is classic delusion, but Granger wasn't chaotic or incoherent. He was methodical, logical, and strangely calm, like someone who had accepted something most of us can't even process. Then there's the wildcard theory, that Granger did make contact, that he did leave, and that he returned but didn't stay, that maybe the world he came back to wasn't the same, or that we wouldn't recognize him now. Some go further, saying he never left physically, but that something in his mind shifted so completely that he became someone else, that the Granger Taylor we knew ended, and someone else woke up in his place. That theory is less about aliens and more about consciousness, about transformation, but whatever the truth is, no theory fully explains everything. Not the note, not the silence, not the truck, not the way people who knew him still look toward the sky. To this day, Granger Taylor remains listed as a missing person. There is no confirmed cause of death, no official closure, only fragments of what may or may not have been him, and a note that reads more like prophecy than farewell. His spaceship still stands in the backyard where he built it, overgrown and silent. Locals say it creaks in the wind, that sometimes it hums even when there's no power running to it. Theories still swirl online. New ones surface every year. Was he taken? Was he lost? Was he chosen? Or was it all a carefully constructed story from a brilliant mind that couldn't quite find its place on Earth? Granger's story doesn't have an ending. And maybe that's the point. Maybe some stories are meant to stay open, like a signal still transmitting, waiting for a reply. There are some who believe Granger never left, that he's out there right now living quietly under another name, or hidden somewhere only the sky remembers. And then there are those who believe he completed his journey, that he traveled among the stars like he said he would, and that someday he might still come back. 42 months have long since passed, but the timeline never really mattered. Not when time bends in strange places, and not when belief is stronger than gravity. So if one night you find yourself in the forests of Vancouver Island and you hear something overhead, something that moves without sound, maybe look up and remember the boy who built a spaceship and waited for someone to notice. Because in the end, maybe they did know. Mysteries are revealed every week. This is the Midnight Channel, where the strange never sleeps.